Well, hello, Life Group leaders. I hope that you all are doing well this week as you gear up to jump into Numbers chapter 13. This is lesson 3 in our book as we have begin this study of the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy. I would encourage you to begin by asking your class a simple yet profound question. If you could do anything for the glory of God with the knowledge at the beginning that you would not fail, what would you do? I think this is an important thing for us to think through as we fathom what might God be calling us to do. How might God be calling us to use our time, our lives, our gifts to glorify Him? And when we ask it in this way, where our thought process isn't hindered by fear and what ifs we fail, what if this doesn't work, we don't have these skills, these resources, this time, etc., it frees us to truly see things in the way that they are, because when we're dealing with an all-powerful God, all things are possible. The reason I begin by asking that question is because this story deals with wasted potential. It deals with tragedy. It deals with unbelief in the failure to go out and receive the blessing that God has to offer because of fear. And so let's just jump right into it. Numbers chapter 13. I think the book has you beginning in verse 17. A little bit of context as we're beginning this story, as it's really a narrative, kind of a large chunk of scripture. You have to keep in mind, this is taking place after the people of Israel, they were enslaved in Egypt, and God appeared to Moses and instructed him to be his spokesperson to ultimately set the people of Israel free. This is God keeping his promise to Abraham, if you recall way back in Genesis 12, that God was going to give Abraham's descendants a land, and he would bless them there, where there they would become a mighty nation. Ultimately, all the earth would be blessed from his offspring. And so now is the time for God to keep his promise. And so he has brought the people of Israel, who have now become a mighty nation, just as he promised, out of Egypt. He delivers them miraculously out of the hand of Pharaoh through all of the plagues, through crossing the Red Sea, proving God's might, proving God's power. He brings them to Sinai, where he makes his covenant with them, making them his special people, giving them the law, making them an actual people rather than just a collection of individuals. And then, as they move towards the promised land, they now stay at Kadesh Barnea, where they're at the southern border of the promised land. Now they're right here. The time is now for them to go in. And so Moses gathers up 12 men, one from each of the tribes, to go in and scout out the land. Now the question is not, in the mind of Moses, whether or not they should go in. The question is, how and what should they expect when they do? And so their plan is to go in to see what's the land like, what are the people like, how strong are their militaries, how great are their resources, so they can make well-informed decisions as they enter in. Now you have to keep in mind, you have to kind of put your group in the perspective, in the shoes of these people. They have no idea what to expect. I mean, they have traveled through the wilderness, leaving behind what was probably the greatest civilization on the planet at the time, going into a place totally unknown, fully banking on God to keep his promises. And so in the story, what we see, kind of a breakdown, is we see first and foremost, these men are selected, they are sent into the land, and they spend 40 days in the land of Canaan. And now when they come back, they find that this land was wonderful. It was fruitful. They bring back the big branch of grapes, showing just how fruitful the land is. And now this is a big deal, because the livelihood of these people, their ability to thrive and survive, is directly tied to how good the land is, how good the soil is, how well it can produce crops that can sustain them. And so as they find this great news that it is a fruitful land, a land flowing with milk and honey, as it's famously said, This is once again a sign that God has kept his promises. Another sign, just like the Red Sea, just like the plagues, just like freeing them from Egypt, just like all of these things, that God is faithful, that God is able to provide. But there's a problem. There's a problem where this story instantly becomes incredibly relatable to each of our individual lives. That problem is fear. You see, in addition to finding all of these great things about the promised land, many of these spies also notice that there are people there. Not only people, but people that are big, people that are strong, people that are living in in cities with walls around them, fortifying them. The spies feel that this land is not conquerable. Now, as I think about it, I almost wonder if these men went in looking for reasons to doubt, looking for reasons to not enter into the land. I wonder if perhaps that unbelief was already there. They just merely found excuses to explain it away. You see, Caleb responds when they come out of the land saying, "Let's go now, we can take this land." But another 10 of them respond saying, "No, they are stronger than us." Now, I think it's important to focus in on that response. The reason why 10 of the spies did not want to enter into the land is because those that were in the land were stronger than them. Notice what's missing here. Notice what's not on their mind. God. God that has delivered them from the greatest army on the planet. God has worked miracles right before their eyes. Their mind is not on what God can do, but on what they can do. And that attitude always gives way to fear. I think it's an important question to ask. How often do we find ourselves thinking in this same way? I wish I could stand here and tell you that every time I encounter a problem, every time I encounter a decision, every time I encounter a hard time, my very first response is to go to the Lord in prayer. But oftentimes, that's my backup when my decisions, when my abilities don't work out. So often, my first thought is not, what would God want me to do? But rather, what should I do? Sometimes there's days that go by and I don't even give God the time, the thought that I should. And so often we as believers live life almost forgetting as though God exists. I think this is heartbreaking. And I think it completely incapacitates us from being able to live bold lives of trust in the Lord. I think this passage serves as a grave warning of what happens when we don't have God at the forefront of our minds, when we doubt God, when we don't think through a lens of what can God do, not what can I do. That's what we see in this passage. We see these 10 spies respond by lying, essentially. They lie to the people of Israel, saying the land is not good. It's a land that devours those that live in it. And also on top of that, these people are giants. It's impossible. We could never possibly conquer it. But what they don't understand is out of fear of trying to protect themselves, they're actually rejecting the good thing that God has for them. They think that by going about it in their own way that they're actually protecting them from what God might bring that might hurt them. But in reality, they are missing out on God's good plan. How many times in our own lives have we missed out on God's good plan because we were too scared to obey, too scared to take that risk, too scared to trust Him, trying to keep everything for ourselves? Notice the irony. These people, they lie. They say that the land that God had promised would consume them, and yet what? They are just in these next few chapters consumed by the land they choose to stay in. They lie. They say that they're scared to fight these people, but what happens? They end up having to wage this war anyways. They say that the land was so bad and unfruitful, and yet because of that, they choose to stay in the wilderness in a desert that is completely barren. All the things they wanted to avoid, they had to do anyway. But in the meantime, they missed out on the blessings and the goodness and the gifts that they could have experienced all along if they had just trusted God in the first place. And that's really where I'm going to go with this lesson with my group. I encourage you as well, is where in our lives right now is God calling us to trust Him in the first place? I don't want to make the mistake of, out of fear, saying no to God and regretting it. Saying no to God and missing out on the good thing that He had for me. Settling for a lesser thing than God's best. Maybe God is calling someone in your group to serve somewhere in the church. Maybe that's starting a D group, that's serving in the kids ministry. Hey, that's a good one right there. You should throw that one out. But maybe God's calling them to get involved and they're hesitant. Maybe God's calling someone in your group to have a conversation they need to have. Maybe there's a broken relationship. Maybe they have a loved one that doesn't know the gospel, whatever it might be, and they're holding back out of fear. Maybe God's calling them to confess some sin. Maybe they need to confess something to their spouse, to their friend, to their children, and they're holding back, scared of the consequences, not knowing that doing it God's way is better. Maybe there's someone in your group that's been feeling called to ministry. Maybe because they have a career, they have stability, they have a good income, that they're trying to ignore and reject that calling. But what they really need is to see that God's plan is best. And as scary as things might be, as hard as it might be, when we obey God, His ways are always better. God's ways are better, no matter how scary, how difficult it might appear. He's a good God. We can trust in Him. That's who He's proven Himself to be. And so I ask, if there's anything that we could attempt for God knowing we would succeed, what would it be? What is it that God is calling us to do that maybe out of fear, out of worry, or out of wanting to stay comfortable, we've kind of pushed off in our minds? Let us be a people who don't fall into the same mistake as the people of Israel here. But let's be a people who, knowing how good God is, trust Him and walk into even things that are scary, knowing that God has our back and God will provide. So I hope this has been helpful, giving you just kind of an overview of this passage. I'm praying for you as you prepare this week and just looking forward to all that the Lord has in store through this lesson. God bless you guys.